Hello friends, welcome to my video on choosing correct architectural pattern. In this video we will understand MVVM, MVVMI and clean architecture. Here is the list of few widely used architecture patterns. MVP, it stands for Model View Presenter. MVVM, Model View Model. Then MVVMI, it stands for Model View Model and Interactor. Interactor is also known as use case. Then Viper, View, Interactor, Presenter, Entity and Router. Here entity is model for Interactor. So in this architecture patterns, two things are common. One is view, another is model, and rest are, we can say, extension of the view and model. Means by extending our code, how we can achieve clean code. And why we are following all these or different type of architecture patterns? The main motto is to achieve the testable code, maintainable, scalable and reusable code. And in short, we can say to achieve clean code. So the aim of any architecture pattern is to achieve clean code. In some use cases you will find few patterns are good, and in some use cases other patterns are good. So based on the scenario we use which architecture pattern to be used. In this video we will not learn about MVP or Viper. Those things we will learn in future. So model, there can be different types of model. Model can be UI related, which is not UI models. It can be feature specific model, domain model and network model. So we can say or we can consider that model persists some information which will be used in UI, also in other places. So ideally model should not contain any business logic. Now let's go through one small example how I end up using this MVVM and MVVMI. First I got one project where I got some basic use cases or basic scenarios. So I developed the view layer. View layer, it contains layout, some custom views, activity or fragment. Then we got some more requirements where I need to handle the skin orientation change. That means I need to handle the life cycle, view life cycle. Also I had to make some network call and process the data before showing to the user. So I found that as I have written everything in my activity or fragment, my activity or fragment contains content lifecycle related logic, network call, presentation logic, that formatters or additional parsers which is required to be displayed in UI or in view, and business logic. In short, we can say my activity and fragment became like God because it contains everything. And the major problem I found that it is not reusable. Several times I found there are a few scenarios where I can reuse the code, but it is integrated inside the activity, or I have written everything inside the same activity. It was very tough to reuse. It was tightly coupled. So here the major challenge was, first is life cycle our logic, and second is the scalable part, because or not reusable. Then Android came up with architecture pattern, architecture component, which includes view model. So a view model scope takes care of the life cycle. That means the view model scope persists from activity creation till activity finished, or actual destroy of activity. So the same information, whatever we have written in the view model, will persist. In that case, no need for me to additionally handle the additional logic for which is required, or which was required for my view to be displayed, like orientation change, on pause, on resume, those things. So I moved all those code inside view model. Now my activity became simple, and activity listens to the changes of view model. So it's like a binding. And in that case, a view model contains network call, presentation logic, and business logic. Because the lifecycle aware is already, view model is already lifecycle aware. So additional 3 logic it contains. Now we found that the presentation logic became huge, and also business logic and network logic are huge. So my view model now became like God, and I cannot reuse it. Means I cannot reuse the some of the code from view model. So first I moved the presentation logic thing to separate class, but those get injected in view model. Like formatters, parsers those are huge, or those are big, and those needs to be reused only. In other cases also I found that I need to use the same formatters and parsers. That's why I have created different class and use the object inside the view model. But still the network call and business logic were there with the view model. Now again several times you will find the same network call can be reused, or the same network call can be triggered from different scenarios, and ideally business logic or network call are not meant for view model, or it's not the scope of a view model, that view model should not contain those information. It's better if we can again extract it, so that I can say that because my view model is part of the presentation layer, and network call or business logic, those are not part of presentation layer. Then I moved those code, and I have given another name, data source. So that data source becomes part of domain layer, and my view model will request for some action in data source, and view model will observe to the changes of data source. In that case, data source means in my use case I found that data source was making the network call, and also it was handling the business logic. So the code became testable. I can write unit testing now. Then again we found there are some scenarios where I had to use local data source or a database, like a room database, instead of network call. And also in some cases we need to use both. So in that case I found that the code inside the data source became big. Then again I moved, I have created another layer that is known as repository. So repository will connect to the local database or room database, and also it can connect to the remote data source. One is known as a local data source, which is our database. Second was a remote data source, which is network API call. And view model will now observe to the changes of repository instead of data source directly. In this case we can say I was just obfuscating the access of a data source directly to the view model. So by using a repository, and view model no need to know which type of data source we are using, whether it's local data source or it's remote. Those logic can be inside the repository. And then as we found that the business logic keeps on increasing. Like I got one scenario where based on means I made a network call to get profile information, and if few of the information is missing, then I had to fill it with some different data, and also there are some additional information for which I got requirement to make another network call. So the logic, business logic became complex. Sometimes the business logic can initiate another network call as well, or the data can business logic needs data from data source, adjacent data source. In that case I found that this approach didn't work, and ideally this traditional approach, or not traditional, we can say this approach of MVVM worked in 70% of scenarios. However, there is 20% of cases where I found those type of deviations. In that case again I created another layer in between view model and repository, that is interactor or use case. Now my view model will request to the interactor, and also view model will observe the changes of interactor, and interactor will perform some operation based on the business logic. Also interactor will connect to a required repository to make network calls, or our local data source. So the repository will decide from where to get the data. Interactor will request to the repository for the data. If the then interactor will validate the data, and if the data belongs to some type, again whatever the operation is required, those things can be performed either by again interactor will can connect to the repository and get the data. So in that case I found that it became again scalable, and one interactor can fulfill the lots of the or complex business logic. And this one is known as MVVMI, where we had already discussed model. Left side the presence layer contain view and view model. So till that it became MVVM. Then view model connects with the interactor. So it became MVVMI. MVVM with interactor, and interactor will connect to the repository, get the information. So we can say that Interactor will listen to the changes of repository. View model will listen to the changes of interactor, and view model can request to interactor. Also, I found that in several cases where we can reuse any block of code, like there is chances of repository can be reused, interactor can be reused, also view model can be reused. So what is the disadvantage of MVVMI? One major disadvantage I found that as there are only 20 or 30% scenario where I need the interactor, or where the business logic is complex, or we need to write the business logic. But in normal normal scenarios, it's not required. So the additional code or the boilerplate code will increase, but it can scale. Wherever MVVM works for, we can say 70 covers for 70% scenarios, MVVM covers almost all scenarios. So our aim should be to achieve clean code or testable code. Thank you.